GLM 5.2 gives you 1 million tokens right out of the box for $1.40 per million input tokens, while Claude Code locks standard subscribers at 200K. That's 5 times the context at the default tier, and that gap alone could decide your next project. Both tools are getting real attention right now, so I went through the actual docs, pricing pages, and every benchmark I could find, comparing Claude Code versus GLM 5.2 across 5 real tests. No vendor money, no cherry picking, just the numbers as they stand. And honestly, the coding quality question is way messier than I expected, because one side has community scores and the other has model evals, and they're not on the same ruler at all. So figuring out which one actually holds up in a real dev workflow is exactly what this is about. So this one's for developers who need to pick a coding assistant and don't want to burn money on the wrong one, because the difference between a $20 monthly subscription and 1.40 autos per $1 million tokens is a real budget decision depending on how hard you're hitting the API, and that's not a rounding error. Test 1 is code generation and debugging, and this is where things get frustrating fast, because you ship a bug, your assistant misses it, and now you're debugging the debugger, which is why I wanted hard numbers from both sides before calling anything. What surprised me is that these two don't even share a benchmark. Claude Code pulled a 9.2 out of 10 for overall code accuracy and 9.4 for debugging on the DIY AI dataset, while GLM 5.2 scores 62.1 on SWE Bench Pro and 81.0 on Terminal Bench 2.1, which are strong numbers, but a totally different ruler. I was expecting one clear winner here, and what I got instead was 2 completely separate test setups with no overlap, so I'm not calling it. Code generation is a tie, 0-0, 1 test tied, and until someone runs both through the exact same codebase, this one stays open. Test 2 is API and integration ecosystem, and the failure mode here is real. You pick a tool, wire it into your stack, and then find out it doesn't support your language or your cloud provider, which is a painful rewrite. So I wanted to know exactly what each one plugs into before anyone gets burned. Claude Code has official SDKs for Python, TypeScript, Java, Go, and Ruby, plus 5 cloud partners including Bedrock and Vertex AI, while GLM 5.2 goes a different route and is OpenAI compatible, so you can drop it into any existing app without changing your stack. And both support streaming and caching, which is really interesting. I want to be honest here, these are genuinely different approaches, and I don't think one is objectively better, because Claude Code's native SDKs are great if you're building from scratch in those languages, but GLM 5.2's OpenAI compatibility is honestly a smart move if you've already got an existing tool that talks to OpenAI. So it really just depends on where you're starting from. I was expecting Claude Code to pull ahead on sheer SDK depth, but GLM 5.2's universal compatibility basically cancels that out, and they're matched on the features that actually matter day to day, so API and integration is another tie, putting us at 0-0 with 2 tests tied now. Test 3 is pricing, and this one gets messy fast, because you budget for a tool, your usage spikes, and suddenly the bill is way bigger than you planned, or you pay a flat subscription and realize you're barely using it, and either way, picking the wrong model here costs real money. These two are basically apples and oranges. Claude Code runs on subscriptions at $20 a month for Pro, $100 for Max off the X, up to $200 for Max 20X, while GLM 5.2 is pay per token at 1.40 per million input tokens and 4.40 per million output tokens on Requesty. And Anthropic doesn't even publish a per token rate for the API. Honestly, I was expecting to hand this one to GLM 5.2 on raw token cost alone, but the models are structured so differently that a direct comparison just doesn't hold without knowing your usage pattern. So pricing is a tie, and that's 3 tests tied, 0-0. Test 4 is latency, and the failure mode here is really annoying. You're chaining tool calls in a coding workflow. Each one takes 800 milliseconds, and suddenly, a simple refactor is eating 15 seconds of your day, which kills your flow state and compounds fast when you're literally hammering an assistant all day. I dug through every GLM 5.2 doc and provider page I could find, and nobody's publishing latency numbers, so it's a total black box. While Claude Code at least gives you something, 300 to 800 milliseconds per tool call, 10 to 15 seconds for multi-step tasks, and 30 plus seconds when context gets bloated. But comparing that to nothing isn't really a comparison. I was expecting at least one provider to have published GLM 5.2 response times, and what I got was nothing. so latency is a tie by default. You can't score what you can't see, and that puts us at 4 tied, 0-0 across the board. Test 5 is context window, and this is where it gets concrete. You load a 50,000 token file into your coding assistant. It chokes and drops half the context, and now it's giving you answers based on an incomplete picture of your codebase, which is a wrong answer you might not even catch. The gap at the standard tier genuinely surprised me. Claude Code's Pro and Max subscriptions cap you at 200,000 tokens, while GLM 5.2 hands you a full million tokens right away on ZAI and Deep Infra, and that 5 times difference on the default plan is pretty wild. To be fair, Claude Code can reach 1 million tokens too, but you need the API or an enterprise plan to get there, and on Together AI, GLM 5.2 actually drops to 256,000 tokens. So the provider you pick matters, and the gap is real for most standard users, but not as absolute as the top line numbers make it look. I was expecting this to be closer, and for enterprise users, it basically is. But for anyone on a standard plan, GLM 5.2 wins context window clearly, because 1 million tokens is the default and not an upgrade, so that puts the final score at GLM 5.2 1, Claude Code 0, with 4 tied. Alright, so here's where Claude Code is the clear pick. You get first-class SDKs in 5 languages: Python, TypeScript, Java, Go, and Ruby. Enterprise cloud partnerships with Bedrock, Vertex AI, and Microsoft Foundry. And a community code accuracy score of 9.2 out of 10, which is a strong signal even if it's just one test. And here's where GLM 5.2 is the obvious choice. You get 1 million tokens of context out of the box with no subscription upgrade needed, per token pricing at $1.40 input and $4.40 output per million tokens, and an OpenAI compatible API that lets you drop it into any existing tool without rewriting anything. Honestly, I was expecting a cleaner fight, and what I got was 1 verified win for GLM 5.2 and 4 ties. So here's the decision rule. If you're deep in the Anthropic ecosystem and want a fully managed assistant with native SDKs and enterprise cloud partners, Claude Code is your pick. But if you need 1 million tokens by default and want to pay $1.40 per million tokens, GLM 5.2 wins.